Snow at Heaven's Edge, Chapter 13. The numbness went away, and a mild tingle replaced it. Lin Wuai flexed his fingers and toes as the feeling returned to them. His heart, too, regained its normal rhythm. His pulse was strong and confident once again. He held his wife closer, her soft flesh against his. "Thank you," he said. She turned over to face him. In that moment, in her nearness, he needed to say no more. His eyes spoke his heart, and hers responded fervently. He kissed her and lost himself within her beating heart and quivering lips. The warmth and softness of her elevated his weariness, revitalized his tired soul. Something stirred within him, and he sat up. "Did you feel it too when fighting him?" she asked. He nodded. "It is like he is nothingness itself," she said, incredulously. "I didn't know such a man can exist. He will most likely return." "He will." Wu Tianxue is an arrogant man. His want of emotions and empathy is the absolute form of self-absorption. We've only superficially wounded him. How are we to... "I don't know," Wu Ai said, moving to the table. "My sword is gone." "What?" Ru Ting was surprised. "Only Xiaoyan was here. Xiaoyan must have taken it." She could not come up with appropriate reasons to explain the act. "I'll go find her." "No, there's something else." Wu Ai's voice was grave. Ru Ting went over to him and saw what was opened before him. "It is a manual." "A log," he corrected. He opened it to the middle and set his fingers on a passage. Her eyes immediately widened when she read, "A demon with a pale face and white hair and terrifying black eyes." They stared knowingly at one another. Ru Ting reached over and turned the journal over to the beginning. Slowly, they started to read. "They say to the far north is a strange land where in winter the snow is as white as the clouds in the heavens. It was also said that the place was as coldly indifferent as it was violently savage. I knew it then it was a place for people like me. There was a famous inn where heroes come and go. The names on the wall marked that place, like they did gravestones. One last cry for the world to remember. I wanted to be forgotten. The cottage I took residence in was not big and used to house a family of 4 until they died. Their bodies laid not far from here by a small stream that flowed year-round, be it summer or winter. I go there a lot to listen to the sounds of running water. Sometimes, in the summer, I would lie there and stare up into the sky and marvel at its immensity. Occasionally, I cried. How nice was it to be like the heavens, infinite and awe-accepted, even of someone like me. That was my only comfort, to know that no matter where I was, that sky still blanketed me. I liked to lay in the stream and close my eyes, feeling the water embrace my sins and soothe my soul as it did my hot, scorched skin. I prayed that it would truly cleanse me. I went to the woods often, mostly for sword practice. I was always careful to do so only when I was certain that no one was around. I didn't want to give up what I had spent my entire youth learning, but I didn't want to fight again. I'm tired. So very tired. Food was scarce in the winter. I relearned how to hunt, trade, and bargain, though the latter two were less preferable, as I liked to remain undisturbed and invisible to the locals. Government soldiers came now and again to demand many things, believing the land was as rich as that of the Central Plains. I gave them whatever they wanted except one time when the soldiers wanted my weapon. I would rather give my life, so I slew the 4 men and their captain. Afterwards, I learned to always hide my sword within a box of scrolls where they would never look. Although this place was barren and ugly, I found many things that I liked here. Flowers bloomed despite the hellish heat and the freezing cold. The wind was common, almost carefree when it whistled by in winter and jostled the trees into a gentle susurration during summer. Cicadas chirped and owls hooted. I took joy in all of it. I did not like guests, but occasionally I would house castaways and realized that people were the same everywhere. Perhaps that was why I could find no escape, only temporary reprieve. Soon, the slow hot summer turned cooler, then freezing. Winter came, and so did the boy. A dirty, beaten child fell onto my doorsteps like a stray. I wanted to shoo him away until he opened his eyes. My eyes were not soft, but he was not afraid. He met mine with his own and reminded me of my own youthful defiance once, long ago. I took him in thinking he would eventually leave either with a traveling merchant's caravan or on his own like so many others had. On the third day, he spoke for the first time. I would never forget his words. I have nowhere else to go until I make right what was wronged. I was taken aback, and the statement had me wondering whether that was the reason I was here. After that, he came to work for me. I wish he could go to town on my behalf, but he was no longer welcomed. The task was too dangerous for him. I had him maintain my garden, and I taught him how to hunt, to read and write, and some of my martial arts. The boy was diligent, but not bright. Unlike others, he never told me why he was in exile, and I never cared to ask. No one asked me about my past, and I won't have said a thing. When he was old enough to properly defend himself, I had him take trips to town in my stead. Many looked at me suspiciously given my reputation of giving temporary housing to their outcasts, a slight to their authority. They tolerated me because they had to trade with me. I had money and goods they wanted. Now they had to deal with him. I heard stories about him from the townsfolk, and that was how I pieced together his past. I understood his resolve for vengeance. The child's father chose not to support the optional war tax and doomed the town. Without the support of one of the town's wealthiest citizens, Wucheng could not collect enough to demonstrate its loyalty for the cause. The consequence was an increased tax rate in an already poor district and elevated the town's resentment of the Fengs. A few years later, Mei tax collectors charged the boy's father with hiding assets from the government. Magistrate Chen took this opportunity to confiscate the Feng's land. How the boy survived for as long as he had after his family's passing was a mystery, though I believed it partly had to do with his stubbornness. The other was his anger. One day, they will forget about me, Feng Wenqiang. They will try to kill me and hunt down my descendants. They will wipe me off their records. But I would not let it be for as long as I am still wronged, the child said. I would make them remember. Winter hardly changed her habits. We were both stupidly stubborn and perhaps even more than a bit arrogant. He refused to let the cold confine us and explored the few caves along the mountain range, avoiding ones with wild bears or snow leopards. The high altitude offered another opportunity for us to practice our sword on this challenging terrain in order to further strengthen our bodies and fortify our minds. During the second winter of my stay and the first of ours as master and pupil, father and son, that we encountered that dreadful monster. I had heard stories of bandits that ravaged the land farther north. Such occurrences were common throughout the Mei Empire. People killed when prompted by fear, hate, greed, and lust. None of these accounted for why these northern bandits killed. They could have taken goods and women without also killing and burning. Soon, stories became myths. Many believed these bandits descended from the once glorious Han Empire. Their forefathers went to the Far East and discovered a dark, uncivilized island where they made pacts with ancient demons that spurred their empty pride. They now returned to the Middle Empire with its riches for their taking. Isolated to the north, these foreign bandits terrorized the populace, kidnapping the strong and beautiful women for their lust and perpetuation of their dark seed. From those unions came the leader of these men, pale face from a sickly bloodline and eyes darkened by the secret arts he practiced. His ambition, however, lay beyond the northern borders, where the winters were long and cold and the summers hot and dry. During his youthful travels, he was lost and ended up in one of the bigger border towns where he tasted peace and kindness. He spat at it. The empire was weak. He might have literally lost his way, but he had figuratively found his destiny in the south. All he had to do was gather his men and march south. They would exterminate the citizens of every town and every city until there were no men left to stop them. The plan required time, and time he had. He dedicated years to cultivate his inner chi, the very essence of life itself. Except, the well he drew from was dark and forbidden. The more he cultivated his chi, the more he relinquished his humanity. The blackness within him rose, and the color drained from his features until even his long black hair turned white. Those were stories, and the man we chanced upon still had a head full of black hair. He was young, tall, and not at all unhandsome, despite how haggard he looked at that moment. We met on a small foothill northwest of the barren fields. I had mistaken him for a member of the White Sword sect, given his attire. He looked afraid, and that was the only time I saw any emotion in him. Dry blood caked his hands. He raised his sword, and my pupil responded in turn. "Wait," I called to them both. "Have you encountered bandits?" "No, I've killed traitors," was his terse reply. Traitors? I asked, as that was a common term used only by the government. "Yes, men who betray and take what is yours. Do such people deserve life?" "No," the boy replied strongly and angrily, his fiery temperament undampened by the cold. The swift, passionate reply surprised even the stranger. I had thought the meditation sessions brought peace to him. I see that it had served to focus his resolve. What was lost must be retaken. "That is right, little brother." The stranger stared at me. I looked back into his eyes and found myself temporarily lost in its swirling blackness. But I recovered. "Who betrayed you?" I asked. "The Holy One of the White Sword sect." His words were full of hate, but he said them with indifference. The response, though terse and strange, was to my liking, and I decided to take him in. "Well, we better go," I said, motioning for him to follow. Sometimes, the enemy of my enemy was not necessarily my friend. I had come to regret this mistake I made that day. Upon reflection, I realized that I had not completely given up on my past, even though I had come here to forget. The three of us sat around the small campfire, sharing meat and wine. He ate very little. He didn't look nervous or afraid. He seemed lost. When he glanced in my direction, however, he looked completely in control again. I opened my mouth several times, but each time, I closed it again without asking the question. Perhaps he read my thoughts. My rightful position. I am the heir, the real Holy One. I come directly from Shenlong's lineage. The young man explained. The original Council of 12 chose me and rejected the proposed heir to His Holiness. His vision is a blasphemous fallacy. I am the one, his descendant. Yet they stole from me my rightful place, calling me a heretic. My swordsmanship is much more refined than his. I proved my place in front of the 12 elders, but those men drew towards the usurper's empty promises of more riches and power and denied what they had witnessed. I tried to take back what is mine. You tried to kill the Holy One? No, that is not enough. They will pick another. I have stolen one of their 3 treasures. I knew what he meant. The sword and the 2 martial arts manuscripts. He must have taken one of them. "Why haven't you taken all 3? Asked Wenqiang. He would have, if he had not failed, I thought. The man wanted not just an empty throne, but also the power behind it. I regretted acquainting this man. "One cannot overcome many," the man spoke. "The cowards are backed by the Mei regime." "Then will you overthrow the government too?" my pupil asked. "I will slay them all," he said. Then he looked solemnly at us. "But they cannot kill me." He pointed at his head, and I knew what he meant. The secret manuscript was too precious to be lost. Wenqiang's eyes lit up. The idea was not so much startling as it was tantalizing to his young ears. I had spoken little on the subject dearest to his heart, but this man had, and I knew I was lost. Once sowed, the seeds of discontent needed nothing more than time to grow. A man who wished nothing to do with the world could do very little to stop a young child who wanted nothing more than to exact his revenge on it. The next day, the stranger left, and winter went with him. The days grew longer and warmer. Our practice continued. Many months passed, then years. The boy became a young man. He took a liking to a local beauty named Dingling. I never knew how they met, but what truly mattered was that she loved him. Her parents, however, disapproved and betrothed her to another. The engagement meant nothing to the lovers as she ran to him and he claimed her heart and body. Wenqiang no longer lived with me and had built another cottage near mine. A sign on his land warned the townsmen of death to any trespassers, especially those seeking to steal his love away from him. Though the denizens of Wuchang steamed with indignity, no one dared to challenge him. I went back to my studies and took up life as a hermit once again. I no longer went to town on foot. A horse brought me there and carried me back with supplies for both households. Sometimes Feng Ling went with me and we would talk. In the past, I feared Feng Wenqiang's strong personality would cause him a similar regret as mine. I was happy to be wrong. His heart had no room for anything else but affection for the girl. The injustice and indignation were a faint memory of the past that life with its newfound joy yearned to forget. He struggled, of course, and sought the justification he needed from Dharma. His wholehearted attempt pleased me, and I thought he would continue on this path of self-cultivation. I was partially right. 2 years passed. I heard neither the mention of vengeance or the lamentation of regret. I would not have the fortitude to remain in a town with people that had wronged me. He made me proud, and he seemed happier. Feng Wenqiang spoke freer as an adult than he ever did as a child, even though he was still terse with his words. This trait of his no longer bothered me. I came to think of poverty of speech as a reflection of the richness of the mind, giving it time to explore and develop each thought. Fatherhood drew near for Feng Wenqiang. He was nervous, one of the few times I saw him so. No midwife dared come. He was an outcast, and so was she the moment she disobeyed her parents' will and married him. We had a few neighbors, and they saw with their own eyes that the Feng's love was true. Several of the older women volunteered to assist, and many hours later, the Fengs welcomed a baby girl. The incident further softened his heart, and mine as well. Spring arrived, and I frequented the stream, though I no longer carried my sword. Feng Wenqiang was its new master. Looking back, I regretted gifting him it. Did the souls of those who died under its sharp edge haunt the owner? If so, I wish it were me that they found. Feng Wenqiang's swordsmanship improved greatly. I believe it had to do with the temperament of his heart. A great swordsman has complete control over his emotions in order to properly focus his qi and guide his blade. I learned much about the way of the sword since coming here and achieved a level I had previously thought unattainable. I understood why the monks of Shaolin and the priests of Wudang underwent long sabbaticals within the inner chambers of their monasteries and temples. Although I spoke about such matters as if I were like them, but I truly liked their discipline. Even the deepest part of the woods or on the peak of the tallest mountain, I found that my wandering thoughts oft traveled to the small cottage next to mine. The little Feng girl had become a shared joy among us. She had inherited all her mother's beauty and charm. A hawk screeched in the distance, and I exhaled, letting my worries and anger go. The warm sun basked my old body, and the soft wind caressed my wrinkled face. I couldn't recall whether I smiled, but I was content. Many swordsmen passed through the land, undoubtedly in search of Tianya Inn. I heard the stories of a clan of invincible swordsmen from an island in the South Sea. They came as if in pilgrimage. Many followed them when they departed, wishing to find this mysterious island. It was foolish. I met one of them long ago in my youth. I remembered the sad, idyllic poem which he once read to me. The memories of that nameless place faded from him the longer he was away. He could no longer recall where it was. Perhaps it was fate, he had said. After defeating many opponents, he attained riches and fame. He didn't leave like his brethren had. Now he couldn't return. I believe it was indeed a rite of passage for them to come to the Central Plains, and that their home was not a place of constant strife, but a place to lay down one's sorrow and rest one's sword. To do so, they must know the nature of war. That was why they came. I suddenly had an impulse to go to this island, but deep within me, I knew that I would not find what was not mine. This land drew many travelers, for it stood at the heaven's edge. Famed men come to disappear, and men with no name come to make one. That year in the north, beyond the pass, bandits emerged and terrorized the local villages and towns. Refugees poured southward. Many martial artists went north, mostly alone, then later in groups, to stop these brigands, but none returned. The terror spread to Wucheng. Ordinances forbade migration without permission from the government. A battalion of Mei soldiers came to pacify the north. The city gates closed, and the soldiers blocked the southerly mountain path. People could only go north, which suited armed martial artists that sought fame and glory. An award of 10,000 gold pieces for the bandit leader's head was further incentive for many fighting men, but not us. I had no need for more money. Feng Wenqiang enjoyed the simple life of fatherhood and anxiously awaited his second child's arrival. He had wished for a child, of any sex, but hopefully one more vocal and playful than the refined and demure Xiao Chu. who grew increasingly beautiful by the day. The small field he tended became more fertile, and yielded more than enough for the four of us. He never forgot the neighbors who helped with Xiaochu's birthing, and always saved the best of the harvest for them. His swordsmanship rivaled those from more established schools. He accomplished this feat through sheer diligence. My heart was at ease. Love completely assuaged his desire for vengeance. He was finally free from that whirlpool of hate and despair. His focus was on his family and a pursuit of excellence. When autumn came, soldiers returned with the tattered remains of the renowned martial artists that had gone north. Outrage and fear spread like wildfire through the town. How large was this band of brigands? How well armed were they? What training did they have? Who was their leader? These questions seemingly had no answer, at least none from the living. News came regarding the destruction of yet another village. Wuchang was abuzz. No one believed the Mei soldiers would or could do much. Many speculated that the soldiers would be the first to leave at the sight of the bandits. Only the tough-talking, arrogant men at Tianya Inn dared to try their luck, but what use were a few pugilists from the rivers and lakes when they faced a possible swarm of well-trained bandits? Hope was bleak and grew bleaker with each passing day. People stared northward for signs of an incoming attack. Days turned to weeks and then to months. They grew weary, too much so to care. Food was scarce and not enough for the increased population. Winter was fast approaching. Many deaths were to follow. The small huts and cottages outside of town fared better, since Mei soldiers were too afraid to venture out to reprovision. Under these conditions, Feng Wenqiang welcomed another daughter. I sat under the capricious candlelight reading another verse of scriptures. I had read it many times before, but each time I learned something new, almost as if the Enlightened One was lecturing to me and pointing out my inadequacies. The Dharma had no absolute, no singular path to salvation. It offered only guidelines, leaving the intricacies to the individual to decipher and master. The way had no simple answer. Perhaps that was why many remained baffled and alienated by his teachings. People preferred a quick solution, and blind faith was a much easier path than the hard one required in daily self-reflective meditation. During my time here, I learned that one could not escape the secular world any more than one could escape the web of karma that one had sown. True enlightenment comes not from isolation but immersion. The monks in the temples never really abandoned the world. Their doors were always open, and they took up arms when necessary, as they had demonstrated countless times before. The severance with attachment was to connect them with greater compassion, a higher love. As the last of the autumn leaves went from a golden yellow to a dark crimson, karma came for us. It started as a feeling about something long ago and forgotten. The fields had frosted over, and a few flakes of snow floated in the crisp, cold air. Wenqiang had no care in the world save the needs of his daughters. He even ventured into the city a few times to purchase toys and sweets for them. None of us expected what happened next. It began with a fire. I remembered looking into the horizon and seeing the bright red flames over the cityscape, lighting up the night sky. I no longer wanted to even lift a sword, but I was ready. Neighbors flocked to my doorstep. I would provide refuge to those who come to me, but I would not venture from my place. I was neither that brave nor that strong anymore. Fengling stared in the direction of the conflagration, likely playing in her mind the harrowing screams of her parents amidst the slaughter and the flames. She was silent. Feng Wenqiang went to her with sword in hand. He looked at me, and I shook my head. I did not try to say anything, for I knew, regardless of what words I chose, he would still go. He left, taking the only horse we had. It was old and unused to a frantic pace, but that night it galloped full speed ahead, its mane flying wildly. Some dark force took possession of both man and horse, drawing them toward the fiery inferno. I could see how it all happened. He had learned in every swing of the sword, in every battle with me, to kill. Once the sword leaves the scabbard, there is but one desire: blood. He must have ridden deep into the city, searching for two people whose faces were as forgettable as the rest. They had spat at him, cursed him, and forbade their daughter from marrying him. If not for love, he would not have screamed himself hoarse while cutting his way through Wuchang. Wenqiang found them amongst the crowd, running for their lives, but trapped between the fire and the bloody blades of the bandits. These men did not flinch at their task, but rather took joy in it. People told me later that Wenqiang smiled in return, a mad ear-to-ear grin. Perhaps through them he saw the worst of himself. The Dings screamed, unsure of Wenqiang's intent. Their eyes took in his face, but their memories failed them until a familiar name reached their ears. He was their daughter's lover, now husband. Cries of joy, fear, and shock all mingled into one as the blood of their neighbors and friends flowed along the slain bandits. Dings got onto the horse, unsure of how to ride, but the animal knew how to find its way home. With a slap on its behind, the horse with its new passenger set off like it never did before on its final journey home. Others raised their hands, swarming to Wenqiang, the man they loathed, for deliverance. It was not his duty to fight. Those slain were not his friends. They had taken everything from him. Feng Wenqiang turned and fled. He ran like a madman. His laughter mixed with the screams of the dead and dying. The air got cooler as he went, and less suffocating. He laughed until his stomach ached. There was justice, after all, he thought. His wife waited for him, eyes brimming with tears when he returned. His in-laws were there too, but he saw only his wife. I looked briefly toward the burning city before returning to my dear horse. He laid still, its last breath long gone. I brushed its neck as I had always done. The Fengs joined me as we said a few words from the scriptures, wishing my friend a fair journey and perhaps a better life in its next karmic cycle. Then we cremated him. The burning flesh filled our nostrils, but we remained until the end. Rumors soon spread about how those connected to Feng Wenqiang lived. Everyone else suffered immeasurable losses. Many recalled the cold look in his eyes as he deserted them. The truth was as clear as the summer day and as translucent as the full moon. Feng Wenqiang colluded with the bandits. The Mei government swiftly accepted this theory in an attempt to save face after losing more than a third of its men during the bandit raid. To maintain authority, the government had to show results. A single man was easier to apprehend than the elusive bandits. They initially came back with a handful of men, and Wenqiang sent them back with plenty of bruises and a few broken bones. His resistance aggravated them further. The village chief denounced Wenqiang while extolling the kindness of the government. Members of the White Sword sect arrived at the behest of the Mei commander. I feared this might happen and warned my pupil against them. He had to flee. Wise were the ancient words that spoke against attachment, of karmic fate, of the cyclical nature of men's lives, and of the tragedies that plague our secular world. Even though I was alone, I had nonetheless tasted the bitterness of separation and loss in my youth. Wenqiang's departure opened a deep void within me, and the tears of his family drowned my soul. I made him flee westward, not through the main passes, but through the forests and the rocky terrain. I warned against going south or east since this would bring him deeper into Mei territory. My one mistake was neglecting the bandit threat and the men we met long ago when we were both younger. I regretted it to this day. The bandits came again. The initial attack was little more than a skirmish. They tested the preparations of the town and prodded the defense for weaknesses. The white-clad man appeared during the second attack. He sought out the 5 White Sword sect members, all of whom were highly skilled swordsmen. He killed one and wounded 2 others. The Mei soldiers repelled the bandits but suffered huge casualties. Despite the victory, no one celebrated. They feared a third attack. I had my own worry. I debated the idea of looking for Wenqiang countless times. Finally, I decided to leave come spring when the weather was more suitable for travel. If I were to find him, I would send for his family. The plan was simple, and all I had to do was wait. Spring never came, however, not for Feng Wenqiang anymore. The neighbors told us that his body was intact. Wolves and vultures did not devour it. The killer had returned to Feng Wenqiang, but not to us. He hung in the town square. I learned later that there were multiple wounds on him. Most occurred after his death, and only one caused it. A fatal upwards thrust below the last rib punctured his left kidney and spleen. He bled to death. When night came, I entered Wucheng for the last time. I slew most of the guards in order to retrieve the body. His widow lit the pyre, and I watched as my heart froze once more. My eyes refused to tear.
I was too old for losses. What few possessions I had, I gave away. I stared into Feng Ling's beautiful but doleful eyes for the final time. I hugged and kissed the pretty Xiao Chu and blessed her younger sibling. Then I walked north. A unit of soldiers accompanied by the remaining 2 White Sword sect members caught up with me. I thought they had come to avenge the deaths of their comrades, and was surprised to hear that they have no intention of doing so. They entreated me to stay my hand, for they had plans to imprison the bandit king on a mountain fort to the east. The White Sword sect had more members coming. I could wait and join them. I replied that if they knew who I was, they would not have come to ask such things. I had never gone beyond the Heavens Pass until that day. A small, nameless village smoldered from a recent raid. The few remaining villagers shuffled through the charred heaps, trying to salvage what supplies they could to rebuild or to restart elsewhere. I asked them about the bandits. Most had blocked the memory of the terrible raid. A few were angry at my blatant disregard for life when they barely escaped themselves. When I told them of my intent, they thought I was mad. But sometimes madness was what it took to defy overwhelming odds. "He will certainly slay you," one of the villagers said. He then apologized for his outbursts. I understood. I was no longer young, and the numbers were against me. Not only that, another whispered, they have a shapeshifter amongst them, pure witchcraft. The first elaborated on the comment of the second. The man took the form of one of our young men. He stayed with us for 3 days before he led them here. They killed our most able men first, and the rest were merely prey. If you find them, promise me you'll kill them all. The saliva from his mouth mixed with the tears that overflowed from his eyes as he snarled like a wild beast. I recognized the look. These people, like me, had nothing. My only solace was that I had the ability to do something, and they did not. The thought of brigands terrorizing these people disgusted me from the sheer cowardliness of the act. Raiding defenseless villages in the name of vengeance against the Mei regime and the White Sword sect was misguided. If the pale-faced stranger had known that Wen Qiang harbored the same hatred for the government, would it change anything? These bandits were always on the move, never staying in the same place for consecutive nights. I had to utilize everything I knew about tracking to find them. Day and night, I went tirelessly through the frozen lakes and across chilling tundra. Each village I came upon was another site of destruction and death. Some had no survivors, leaving me to pray to their spirits so that they may find peace. I shall carry their vengeance. After many days and many miles, I chanced upon a hidden village. I did not enter the settlement, but slept outside, waiting and watching. I knew they would soon come. Their scouts were messy and left telltale signs of their presence. A small skirmish happened that first night, resulting in the death of several villagers and the abduction of a few women. I waited patiently, knowing that sometimes sacrifices were inevitable. I promised the victims that none of it would be in vain. On the 5th night, the bandits returned. The man in white was not with them, but I could feel his presence. I decided to intervene. The bandits were faster and stronger than I anticipated, but they fell nonetheless. The strong and able-bodied villagers rallied around me and made a stand. I used my most vicious stances to dispatch my opponents as quickly as possible, for they outnumbered us. In doing so, I forced him to appear. He floated like a piece of white cloth in a strong breeze through the thicket of men. I rushed him and grabbed his foot before he could alight and flung him. He recovered his balance midair and rode to a stop. His pale face had gone sickly white with the passing years, and he showed even fewer emotions than before. The black in his hair was completely gone. "I remember," he said, and his lips quivered slightly in what must be an attempt at a smile. "So, you've received my gift." "Why?" I asked. "You'll find out soon," he said. He shifted his feet, and suddenly he was upon me, sword aimed at my throat. I stepped back and caught the blade between my palms. The coldness of the metal chilled my bones. He twisted the blade to free it from my grasp, and struck out again and again. I parried each time, batting at the spine of the sword. He was initially cautious, and I was eager for victory. I wanted to drench his white smock red. Whenever I thought I had the better of him, he found a way to elude my attacks. I slowed and made myself more deliberate in my movements. He was dangerous. After all, he had killed my pupil. I bombarded him with various palm and fist styles, but none penetrated his defense nor baited him out of position. His offensive counters were equally ineffective against mine. The sword that thrust out bent against my chi. 3 quick palm strikes to his chest forced him to retreat, and a kick sent him skidding backwards. I expected him to be hurt or at least dazed from the blows, but the sharp tip of his sword came at me once more and forced me to fall sideways and roll away. The smell of smoke filled my nostrils, and I had a glimpse of the chaotic scene around me. The villagers continued to fight and die while the bandits hauled off their booties. I had to slay their leader no matter the cost. It was the only way to stop this madness. The battle between us dragged on. After the 150th round, my legs grew weak. My breathing became more disrupted. The stranger only grew stronger. His speed increased tremendously. I spun around and grasped his wrist to free the sword from his hand. He lowered his shoulder into my chest, sending me wheeling backwards. Blood filled my gullet. I had not tasted my own blood in decades, and it infuriated me. He was laughing through his dark eyes as he stared at me. I spat the blood at him and countered the blow, an elbow strike to his chest. I pushed down hard to unbalance him, stepping in as I did so to deny him space. The scissor-like maneuver hurled him sideways. I took in deep drafts of air. How much longer would I last? Could I last? He rose like a 1,000-year pine from the depths of the earth, tall and unyielding. Snow skidded off his thin garment as he stared at me with nothingness in his eyes. I knew you had tremendous chi training when I first met you, he said. I am glad we can fight. Very glad. I will kill you, I replied. Very well then. If I cannot beat you, then I cannot be strong enough to carry out my ambitions, and there's no use for this life. The effect of his words cut me much deeper than his sword and chilled me much more than the Arctic wind. He was careless with life. The martial artists who left Tianya Inn to hunt him, Wen Qiang, and the countless others, including me, were whetstones for him to polish his blade. I was beyond exhaustion. My lungs burned with every breath, and I felt every beat of my overworked heart in my throbbing head. I waited for his attack. This would be the last. He came at me with his sword seemingly slashing from multiple angles at once, but I could no longer move fast enough to stop it. I pivoted to avoid the cut, but could not dodge the thrust. I saw the tip of the blade pierce the air, turning the falling snow around it into rain as it headed toward me. I felt it burn within my flesh. The demon king with a pale face, white hair, and terrifying black eyes had marked me. With what life force I had left, I walked deeper into the sword until I reached the hilt. I struck. My hands moved through the offensive sequence that I had practiced all my life. Blood sprayed to my face. I could smell and taste it. He fell back, pulling out the sword in the process. He did not bounce back up. I stumbled to my knees. My vision started to blur, and through the haze I saw a figure emerge from the whiteness itself. He was small and hunched, a profile that reminded me of the village chief and town magistrate. The blurry figure looked at me, and then the body lying before him. He stood for a long while. Finally, he bent over and lifted the pale-faced demon over his shoulder. He seemed to have changed in that instant, bulkier and taller. Chief Chen effortlessly carried the body away. Snow fell endlessly, and the wind whipped into a frenzy. Amidst this chaos, my world turned blurry white. The mark burned. I could not articulate the pain, for there were no words for it. Not only did the wound hurt, but the flesh smelled rotten. I was feverish, and I was certain at one point that I would die. My spirit hovered above my sweating, quaking body while the kind villagers tried their best to nurse me. Sometimes I woke and stared at them with glazed eyes. The dreams came and went. Sometimes a nonsensical collage of nostalgic images and feelings, and at other times a deeply disturbing nightmare of a man in white, his pale face elongated, and his wide-open jaw packed with sharp, spiky teeth dripping blood. I forced myself up. The wound in my chest was a dull ache, but that emptiness I thought I had long eluded returned. Tears fell instead of blood. The children's voices brought me back. I went outside. Beyond the charred houses, several children engaged in an imaginary war atop a small hill. A small boy was attempting to climb it, but kept sliding. He persisted. The other children soon tired of their game and went away. I figured he would follow, but he maintained his course and eventually summited. I climbed after him. "Wow," he said in joy. I looked beyond the hill and saw nothing special except a few more trees. "What are you looking at?" There, he pointed at the tip of the furthest mountain. What's so special about that? I haven't been there. Have you, uncle? I have. I waited for him to ask me more questions about it, but he never did. He kept on looking. Do you know what is beyond the mountain? No, but I'll find out when I'm older. What happens if it is not beautiful on the other side? I asked. After a pensive moment, he smiled and said, It's not beautiful here, but I still love it. We stood there for some time. My eyes naturally gazed higher. I like to stare at the sky because it reminded me of the world's vastness. Not everyone was like the May soldiers or the bandits and their leader. Brave, strong, and just men were out there doing their part to make the Central Plains a little kinder and a little fairer. This notion comforted me. I thanked the villagers and offered my aid in the rebuilding of their village. They politely declined, citing my age and my recent injuries. They asked me to play with their children, tell stories, and teach them. I had a lot to say, but not much left to write. As my wounds healed, I dreaded what was to come. He too should have recovered and surely gotten stronger. Each day, I sat at the edge of the village, watching and waiting. I feel heavier and older as the days pass. Sometimes intermingled between episodes of anticipation was this strange tranquility. I thought about our battle countless times, and in each recollection, I could not find a flaw to exploit. Unfortunately, this entry might be my last. I started the journal as a way for me to practice my penmanship, but there was little left for me to write and much for me to do. I will wait, and he will come.
Hey, you've made it to the end. If you like it so far, please subscribe and like. This lets me know I'm on the right path. And if you can't wait for the next installment of Snow at Heaven's Edge, then head on over to Amazon and read the story in its entirety for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. Alternatively, you can check out Dreamweaver and Duo on Mount Taiyuan as well. Both of these stories are done and available for free here on YouTube, Spotify, and Audible. If you want to support me, please consider going to my Ko-fi and being a member. Have a great day.